I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. With all due respect to Ladbrokes, Kasich had it nailed 3 weeks ago.
I got a feeling that when March Madness ends, Villanova may be the national champion.
Kasich knows all. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Wisconsin primary day. Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders are both expecting big wins tonight, while their chief rivals, the national frontrunners Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, have been throwing up some three-point buzzer beater attempts. There's more than just delegates at stake this evening in Wisconsin. 2 full weeks separate today's primary from the next big election that's here in New York on April 19. We're going to talk about all these candidates tonight, but let's start with Donald J. Trump, billionaire. The Republican frontrunner spent yesterday trying to woo voters in the Badger State, where his wife Melania made a rare appearance on the campaign trail, spoke on his behalf. While still predicting surprise Wisconsin triumph this evening, Trump has been zeroing in on a targeted message about establishment forces trying to stop him. Here's Trump at a rally in Milwaukee last night.
These are establishment people that don't want to see it happen because they're all under troth. They're all making a lot of money. I don't even think in many cases they care who wins. They want to keep it going. I'm self-funding my campaign. I'm putting up my own money, right? And nobody does this. I guess the last might have been Ross Perot. I don't know. I don't know of anybody that does it. I have turned down tens of millions of dollars from special interests and from people, and frankly, from friends of mine. One guy in particular is a very rich guy, member of the Mar-a-Lago Club, and I see him like a few months ago. Donald, I'd like to make a major contribution to you or your PAC. I said, I don't have a PAC. I don't have. You know, all these guys have these phony PACs. In fact, I saw where Cruz the other day had an event run by his PAC. That's not allowed.
So, John, there's the beginnings of a message. If Trump does lose tonight, let's not assume, but let's say hypothetically he does, what can he do in the immediate aftermath of the results to minimize the damage of a loss in Wisconsin?
Well, I think we know what he's probably going to do, which is say that everyone was out to get him and that the establishment lined up against him and all that kind of stuff. I think, the other thing we've heard he might do now is start to actually do some serious policy speeches. And I think that would be a very good idea on his part. Not complain about this, not whine about it, but get down to the business of starting to seem more presidential, talk about policy, and not make dumb mistakes like he's been making for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing is to just run a great campaign and maybe policy, but also try to take advantage of New York, where he's going to be ahead in the polls, and try to get back to, as Donald Trump would say, winning so much that people get bored. I think it's not in his nature not to spin the results at least a little bit. Yeah. But I think what he can say is, and I think it has the added advantage of being true, that they had the governor and you had the PACs they raid against him, and he's going to need to fight harder for the public.
Right.
So try to overcome these forces.
I think those things are true, but look, it's the case that the establishment is going to be arrayed against him going forward. And to the extent that he has a good argument back to them, again, it won't change their minds, but to other voters, it seems to me, do what his wife's been telling him, act more presidential so that when the establishment stands up, tries to take him out, he can have a more credible reply to that, which is to say, I don't know why you guys are arrayed against me. Look at how serious and sober I'm being.
Yeah. The other thing is, if he can get through a long national interview without creating negative news, I think that would also be good to kind of show that the earned media strategy that he's used can work for him rather than it has for the last week or so, which is work against him.
And I know we said this last night, but, I think being a little less promiscuous with the media in terms of just doing quite so much of it, just try to pick your shots and really get something done with each one of these interviews. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is now. Got to accomplish something with each one of these hits. All right, perhaps bracing for a Badger State bruising, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, Robbie Mook, released a mathy memo last night describing Bernie Sanders' path to the Democratic nomination as virtually impassable. And today, Clinton was on The View talking about what she learned from the 2008 campaign, about her differences with Bernie Sanders, and also her celebrity crush on George Clooney, who's holding a fundraiser for her this month. Clinton also has to deal with the Democratic contest in Wyoming this weekend. The state holds caucuses, and we know that caucuses are generally good for the Burns. So, Mark, my question to you, given the expectation that Hillary Clinton will lose tonight. Not certain, but expectation. What can she do, in the same way as Trump may have to do, to minimize the impact of that loss?
Three things. Keep pounding on Democrats, on the media rather, on this notion that Sanders does not really have a mathematical path right now, no matter how well he does in Wisconsin. Two is to go on the offense on Sanders in a less scattershot approach. And we'll talk later about an interview he did with the New York Daily News Ed Board. But she should pick stuff about Sanders that she really believes. And this interview dovetails with one of her main messages about him, which is he's not got realistic notions and plans about how to be president. And the third thing is she needs a New York strategy. Because if Sanders wins tonight, she will come into New York on the defensive, polls tightening. And she needs a New York strategy to counteract what we've talked about here, which is Sanders' strength, including big visuals of crowds in New York.
I think she right now is doing what a lot of candidates do. She started to look on to future contests. She's already, got stuff going on in Pennsylvania and some of the other states. I think she should just go all in on New York. She must win New York. If she loses tonight, just for not because of math, but because of just the narrative, she got to come to her home state and she got to make sure she wins it. And she got to make sure she wins it. I think she needs to win it big too. So I would say just put all your chips down on New York. Do the arguments that you're talking about. Make those arguments, but really focus in a laser-like way on winning the state in a declarative, definitive fashion.
The more Sanders wins by tonight, if he wins, the more they need to really emphasize to reporters. And again, they're doing it, but they've got to really press it. That memo was the prelude, but they've got to say, look how many delegates he made up tonight. Maybe he makes up 8 delegates maximum net. Right. That's not enough to put a dent in her lead in any meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think, another thing we discussed on a previous occasion, I think, she got to figure out that strategy of how she's going to counteract his big crowds in New York. And I think by doing that with one-to-one voter contact.
Yeah. All right. Those are the national frontrunners. Now let's talk about the Wisconsin frontrunners. Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders both say that a win tonight could be a momentum shifter in their respective nomination contests. Cruz, who's trying to convince his party that he's the only viable alternative to Trump at the national convention, is holding his election night event in Milwaukee, while Sanders has a rally in Wyoming tonight ahead of the state's caucuses there on Saturday. So, John, let's start with Cruz. What does he need to do to take maximum advantage of a victory if he gets one in Wisconsin tonight?
Well, I think he's got to figure out, and I know he's got a lot of smart people around him. I know they're thinking about that. But he's got to think about where he can win over the course of the next couple of weeks and then figure out how to target his resources and his time in states among these northeastern states. Maybe it's not New York. Maybe it's some of the other states that vote a week later where he can actually pull off some decisive wins. Where can he beat Donald Trump? Maybe with the help of John Kasich. Where can he beat Trump by the end of April?
When Cruz announced for president, people focused on, because of the venue at Liberty University, people focused on the social conservative aspects of it. There was an economic message there. He stressed the economic message more in Wisconsin. He needs to, in the Northeast, become a candidate where people think, Ted Cruz, here's what he'd do on the economy. Tax plan, whatever it is, he's got to figure out to take the moment in the spotlight tonight to talk about jobs and the economy in a way that's big, because his Iowa night speech was pretty good. I can't tell you a single other election night speech he's done that's been anything but kind of long and meandering. Right. He needs a focused speech that plays in the Northeast. That means jobs and the economy.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that for sure. I mean, there's no question that the social conservative piece of his message is not going to be a selling one in a lot of the contests ahead. I don't know what his economic message is. I know what Kasich's is, and I know what Trump's is, but I don't know what Cruz's is. And I think it would be I think you're right. If he has one, he should probably figure out what it is and drive it really loud and clear.
Tonight. And then I think he's got to decide how much he goes all in New York. New York's going to be tough to beat Trump. Yeah. Does he spend the next 2 weeks trying to get delegates away from Trump to keep Trump below 50? Or does he look at some of the other states in the Northeast where maybe, because Trump's not from there, he's got a better chance?
Right on. All right. If Wisconsin voters do deliver Bernie Sanders the expected victory tonight, he will have won 6 out of the last 7 Democratic contests. And his campaign says he has the momentum heading into somewhat friendly Northeastern territory later this month. So, Mark, same question about Bernie Sanders as we just asked about Ted Cruz. What does Sanders need to do to gain maximum leverage, advantage, momentum out of this win tonight if he gets it? Yeah,
I think he needs to figure out in his election night speech, again in Wyoming, a kind of a risky choice, I think, because it's not going to get nearly as much coverage as if he'd come here. I think that may have been a mistake, although I know they want those delegates in Wyoming. I think he needs to send a message to the country that he's focused, that he has a plan to beat Hillary Clinton and not be so scattershot. Again, the performance of the speech matters. He thinks speech is a speech, but I think he's got a chance tonight to send a message to the New York media, the national media, that he's got a plan for the country and a plan to beat her, more than just I'm doing better in head-to-head polls against Republicans.
You know, the Clinton campaign talks about how the Sanders campaign is increasingly nasty, is increasingly negative. I think by any historical standards, they still aren't that nasty or that negative. But in the end, if Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee, he has to make up a lot of math.
Yeah.
But he also has to reinforce in some way, rhetorically and otherwise, that Hillary Clinton is weak in some way. Not necessarily attack her personally, but ram home the notion that this woman is really not maybe the best person to be the standard bearer for the party.
He's got to do that in the confines of his not wanting to be personal. He must shake up the paradigm. He must get people to look and say, that's interesting, because the press has heard Bernie Sanders' stump speech. Right. I'm not saying change his message, but he must do something special in terms of the performance, the message, the staging, whatever it is. He must do something special so people in the media say, more than just, okay, he beat her in Wisconsin, he might beat her in New York, he gained 8 delegates. He's got to do something more with the moment.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, coming up, is Ted Cruz really, as he contends, the most obvious second choice for Republican delegates at the National Convention in Cleveland? We're going to ask GOP strategist Dan Senor and former Democratic Congressman Harold Ford Jr., Senor and Jr., what both of them think after these words from our sponsors.
The Republican race for president is like Game of Thrones. It's surprising, it's confusing, and it's a little bit sexy. Also, there's a big wall. Here to help us make sense of it, our GOP returning champion, Dan Senor, who advises Paul Ryan, and Hillary Clinton supporter Harold Ford Jr., the former congressman representing the 9th District of MSNBC. Good to see you, gentlemen. Senor and Junior.
Yeah,
good to see
I
you.
like that. It's catchy.
So here's the question. Right now, if Ted Cruz wins big tonight in Wisconsin,
Huge.
We're more and more likely to see a contested convention.
Correct.
Right? So who, going into that contested convention, is the second most likely Republican nominee? If not Donald Trump, then is it Ted Cruz or is it someone else?
It is, well, if Cruz is in the best position, you're wondering if Cruz falters, who's there?
No, I'm asking if we go into a contested convention and Donald Trump is being challenged, is Ted Cruz necessarily the most likely Trump alternative, or is there another person out there who's more likely than Cruz?
Yeah, I've been impressed with the sophistication of Cruz's effort in terms of reaching out to delegates, locking in delegates. He's got a real game, real organization going on. More sophisticated than anything going on. Now, let me caveat it this way. What is going on with this whole delegate game leading up to the convention is beyond the realm of anybody's experience in professional politics, I presume in journalism too, except for, I don't know who, maybe Paul Manafort. So I think, given that nobody really knows what they're doing, my impression is Cruz has got the best operation, and I think he's a logical consensus choice if Trump falters.
Harold, in the Cruz world, doing well in Wisconsin doesn't necessarily mean he's going to win the northeastern states, New York, and then Connecticut, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania. Do you think Ted Cruz has the potential to compete here and pick up a lot of delegates, or a Texan is too far from home in the Northeast, and his profile is not the right fit?
You know, I think Dan is being kind to Ted Cruz. I think if Ted Cruz is the one that upsets this thing and causes a broker convention, you can see Dan back in the forefront with the Paul Ryan candidacy for the presidency. They won't say it, but I got to think that Republicans are not content with Cruz. Now, if that does happen, as a Hillary Clinton supporter, I think we'd be more encouraged to face a Ted Cruz than perhaps someone else. But to your question, I don't know if his geographical disadvantage will hurt him. I think his ideological positions probably hurt him more. And I think Donald Trump is known in this part of the country more so. This is where he got his start. And I think he would naturally be a stronger candidate, particularly in the Republican primary here, than he would be than Ted Cruz would be.
Yeah, let me just say, look, I think Cruz is going to have a big night tonight. I think he'll probably win all of the statewide delegates. I think he'll win most of the.
Do you think he wins all the congressional?
All the statewide delegates, and then half of them are divvied up by congressional district. I think he wins most of the congressional districts. He may not win, Sean Duffy's district. I think Kasich could win the district around Madison. So I think there are one or two he may not win, but he'll win most of them. I think Ted Cruz is going to have a big night, which is great for the Stop Trump efforts. I think it's going to create real negative momentum against Trump. which will last for about 15 seconds. Because as we've seen in this cycle, the race resets after every state. And every time we said, oh, this is an inflection point, same on your side. This is an inflection point. This is a moment. The new chapter is now written. That new chapter is written for like a few days. And I think Trump's going to come storming into New York. And I think he's incredibly strong in New York. Poll after poll after poll I've seen in New York, I think Trump is basically unstoppable in New York. So he'll win New York, and then there's going to be a reset after New York. So this is going to go on for a while. So does True Cruz is going to have a big night, but I don't think it's decisive.
I'm going to ask you to do something that would be kind of like me asking my dog to pretend to be Luciano Pavarotti, okay? Here's what I'm asking you to do. Pretend like you're Donald Trump's
I'm trying to work through all of that.
Communications director, okay? Think about that. The Trump brand right now is probably more battered than it's been throughout the entire time that he's been a presidential candidate. What would you, Harold Ford, crisis communications consultant, tell Donald Trump to do to start to rebuild the brand, get the tarnish off, and get ready for these next contests?
I'd come on a few shows like this, get some serious questions about foreign policy and economic policy. Just as an aside, I'd watched you guys early. I believe that Bernie Sanders hurts himself a little bit when he's not able to talk concretely and specifically and frankly, conceptually, factually about big issues. I'd force Donald Trump to sit and understand those things as he gets to New York, talk about how he's going to not only be the nominee, but his best position because he understands the issues, can make America not only great again, but stronger. And here's some specifics about how we do it. I might even comment, if I were him, about President Obama's the executive ruling today around tax inversions as an example of some of the things he'd like to see get done. But he won't do that. I mean, I think he's made clear when he acts presidential is when he thinks he hurts himself the most. So my advice probably, I imagine there's some people giving it to him, we'd probably be subordinated for some other things.
Would Paul Ryan be a strong general election candidate?
Yes, but he won't do it.
Well, let's talk about why he'd be a strong general election candidate, stipulating that you don't think he'll do it.
Well, let me start by saying I think Hillary Clinton is an incredibly weak general election candidate. Running against just about any Republican,
including Ted Cruz?
With the exception of the two that we have standing right now.
So
I mean, if you go down the list of all the people who were in the race or have thought about running, almost, I mean, her unfavorable, you guys report, her unfavorable numbers are like not that much better than Trump's.
So Ryan's not going
So
to
the
run,
contrast,
no.
So let me say, so the contrast with a guy like Ryan, who everyone acknowledges is a unifying force. It's very hard to demonize him. He does not look like a crazy insurgent on our side. And I just think he's regarded, even among people who disagree with him, as a thoughtful guy. He's constructive. He's trying to get stuff done. I think it is and he's not tarnished with issues like trustworthiness and whatnot. So I think he would be a great contrast, as I think many of the others. I think Kasich would be a good contrast. I think Rubio, I think Walker, I think many of these guys would be a good contrast to Hillary. He won't do it because he does not think that it is appropriate for him. He right now is a check on the insanity. He's a check on the insanity. He's a force against the insanity. And for him to pull out of the speakership...
Stop telling your lies on television.
We'll see in Cleveland.
Stop with the lying.
Stop
with the lying for now.
You sound like Donald Trump.
We'll let you come back and lie some more in a minute. John, just stay right here. Lion Dan, Senor. We're going to talk about the Democratic race, and then Harold can also trash Bernie Sanders. The debate in Brooklyn, we'll talk about that Sanders editorial in the Daily News, all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about it all when we come back.
Wisconsin primary day. That's why we're tingling and vibrating so very much. We're back with the former Democratic Congressman, Hillary Clinton supporter, Harold Ford Jr., and Democratic strategist Dan Senor.
Democratic strategist?
That's what I just said? We made some prompters to that. We'll make you a Republican for tonight. Republican Dan Senor.
I'm happy to be a Democrat tonight. But.
Democrat Harold Ford Jr. Gentlemen, we're going to talk Democrats now. We just talked about the Republicans. The race comes to New York tonight, presumably after Sanders' victory. John and I speculated madly about what Hillary Clinton could do to take the edge off this Wisconsin win. What would you advise her to do if she does lose tonight? She's not doing an event, which is a little odd.
I think I heard one or both of you guys say there has to be a predicate when you come in here this evening and going for the next 2 weeks. This is a home state for her. She represented the state, represented all of New York, including New York City. If I were her, I'd be very prideful of that. I would defend the great interests of this city, the great business interests of this city, talk about its importance not only to the economy here, but nationally and globally. and praised some of the great things Democrats are doing here, including Governor Cuomo's efforts to raise the minimum wage and find ways to not only raise the wages at the very bottom, but how do you raise middle-class wages as well. I'd use this as frankly the blueprint to begin talking nationally about this hard-edged, very pointed economic message that will change America for the better.
Dan, we know you're not actually a Democrat, but you know a fair number of Democrats,
I
right?
do.
So when you look at this state, what does Hillary Clinton need to do to win this state? Because if she loses tonight, she's going to really need to win New York. So what does she need to do here? What's her strategy to win New York State?
I mean, it seems to me the stuff she's been doing over the last few days, locking arms with Andrew Cuomo on the $15 minimum wage, just hugging, hard left litmus test issues and reminding people that she's been in the trenches fighting these fights for decades, and she's been doing it in New York as a senator. I think, I agree with Harold. I think this is a natural spot for her to just kind of remind people of her legacy of representing this state on liberal causes.
Harold, John and I have talked about this. I'm curious again to hear from you. Sanders is going to do events with thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people. Should Hillary Clinton try to compete with that in some way? How should the campaign respond if Sanders is in Washington Square Park with 20,000 people?
Look, he's going to do what he's going to do, and he's going to attract the crowds that he attracts. I don't think that should distract us or distract the candidate or Mrs. Clinton or Secretary Clinton from anything that she lays out that she wants to do. The event she had with Governor Cuomo.
But should they stay away from crowd events so that there's no contrast?
No, I don't think you do that at all. I mean, I think she gets prepared for this big debate that's coming up in the next 7 or 8 days. Be prepared for the attacks that will come from Senator Sanders around speeches that she's given and income that she's generated. Be able to go right at those questions and explain not only to Bernie Sanders but to voters how she may have given those speeches, but she's been on the right side of every issue as it relates to regulations, smart and tough regulations of any industry in this country that may take advantage of taxpayers, of middle-income Americans. So, no, I don't think you stay away from anything. I think you go right at it head on. And she has to remember, she's at home. New Yorkers love her. This is the state she represented. This is the state that launched her political career. And to Dan's point, to your point, I would remind voters all across this state of that. There's got to be stories from upstate to downstate that she can tell.
Yeah, including people she's helped as senator.
No doubt about it.
Did you read the New York Daily News Ed Board interview with Bernie Sanders?
I did not.
Okay. So you read that interview.
I read part of it.
How do you, just again, speaking not as a Clinton partisan, I'm going to bring another question back to you, just as a Democrat. What you know of it, what does it say to you about Bernie? Try to not be a Clinton partisan here and just tell me what you think, where Sanders is most vulnerable in terms of how he addressed that. Is that a real issue? Should we really be worried about the way he answered those questions in the Ed Board?
I think it spoke to, and again, in all fairness, I mean, I was not there, I've only read parts of it, but it seemed to be a lack of preparedness and a willingness to kind of dodge questions, which at this point in the campaign, you would think issues were not issues that were off the beaten path. These were primary issues, central issues in this campaign. I've read some things that even interviews, I think the interview that Mark might have done even before as well, or saw pieces of it. And it was just surprising to see on big foreign policy issues, the Middle East, economic policy around the banks and financial services firms, the kind of answers that he gave just seemed to be akin to someone that frankly has not been paying attention to these issues closely enough.
Congressman, thank you. Harold Ford Jr., Dan, Republican, Dan Senor. Thank you both.
Not a congressman.
Scott Walker would be a good one at the convention.
Yeah, I've been hearing that.
Congratulations,
Yeah, Walker,
congratulations
Cruz
going over.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Great
We'll have you
one,
back soon, I hope. Up next, Donald Trump's new plan for forcing Mexico to pay for that border wall. What it means for your weekend after this.
Donald J. Trump offered up a new policy proposal today. In a memo to the Washington Post, the Republican frontrunner contended that he would force Mexico to pay for that big, beautiful, amazing, wunderbar, all right border wall by cutting off the money immigrants send home to their families. Among the many voices criticizing the implications of such action today was President Obama, who said this during a White House press briefing.
The implications with respect to ending remittances, many of which, by the way, are from legal immigrants and from individuals who are sending money back to their families, are enormous. First of all, they're impractical. The notion that we're going to track every Western Union bit of money that's being sent to Mexico, good luck with that.
I'd like to point out that Western Union, kind of amazing that President Obama in the age of PayPal is talking about Western Union in his press briefing. But anyway, my question for you,
Bitcoin.
is whether Trump's plan for remittances is good policy and or good politics.
Well, it's not good policy because it's really no policy at all. I mean, the president pointed out one of the flaws in it, and I think that it might be good politics in the short term, at least, because Trump has claimed that he would have a way to pressure the Mexican government, and I think it's a talking point. I mean, if you assume that Trump, if he's a nominee, will eventually have to convince a wider electorate that he can get things done, it's predicated on this notion of I did New York real estate deals, and in a New York real estate deal, you bring every weapon to bear, and you make threats, and you cajole, and this is the kind of cajoling threat that he might be able to convince people it would be realistic as a president.
It is comical. It is a joke. It is ridiculous. It's impractical, as President Obama said. And on top of that, I don't even think it's that good at politics, because the truth is that, like, right now, what Donald Trump needs to do is somehow grow his vote. Grow his vote, right? The people who are...
You don't need to grow it much.
Well, you got to grow it a little. He doesn't want it to shrink, right? He's got to get some new voters. I'm not sure there's anybody who is not already in Donald Trump's camp who's going to hear this and think, you know what? I think that actually persuades me that Donald Trump is serious about this immigration thing. He's a serious, thoughtful guy.
It's not about serious proposal. If there's a model of governance, again, it's Donald Trump, deal maker, and making deals involve threats.
Yeah.
Trump got deals done often by threatening people in one way or another.
Yeah, you think this is like? It just doesn't seem to me like.
I'm putting the best gloss on it.
Yes, it's not a good gloss. I think there are some number of voters out there who are on the fence, who might be persuadable by Trump. I just don't see how this particular thing is going to bring them over. If I'm Trump, all I'm interested. You're right. It's not a lot he's got to grow his vote by, but he presumably wants to grow it in the Republican Party and more broadly. I just don't see how this advances that cause at all.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that's clearly going to come up if Trump is the nominee, or if we get to a brokered convention, a contested convention, is more about this electability question, and also about what kind of president would someone be? Would someone be a serious president or a serious contender for the presidency? And I think at some point, even though within the Republican Party there's more of an isolationist mood than there's been in a long time, if other countries start criticizing Trump's policies, proposals, and say this isn't workable. So when he says, well, the president of Mexico, or former president of Mexico, criticized it, yeah, his core supporters like that. But you're going to have some establishment type say this is not a serious argument. The Mexicans will criticize it. Every country doesn't want you to be president.
We have heard many Republicans say that Trump has become a laughingstock on the world stage, and there are lots of foreign governments that have already criticized Trump early on. If he becomes the nominee, it is hard to imagine winning the presidency in the face of a chorus of condemnation and ridicule from around the world among voters in the middle who have to actually decide elections.
Yes, worldwide condemnation and basically endorsement of the Democratic nominee.
Right.
All right, barring any big surprises, John Kasich isn't expected to do all that well in the Wisconsin primary tonight. But he woke up this morning to yet another glowing editorial from the Wall Street Journal, which praised the Ohio topper for staying in the race, writing, quote, Mr. Cruz wants Mr. Kasich out now because he figures the delegates in Cleveland will choose Mr. Cruz if the choice is down to him and Mr. Trump. But if Mr. Kasich is still an option, the delegates might favor him as a better November candidate. So, John, going forward from Wisconsin tonight, what does Kasich need to do to position himself to be the consensus choice in a brokered convention?
Well, I think that look, I mean, it's going to be hard in any instance. And in the end, the only argument Kasich has is an electability argument. He's going to be able in Cleveland to say, look, I'm from Ohio. Everybody knows how popular I am here in this important battleground state. But I think if that argument's going to have legs, what happens after Wisconsin just matters a lot. Kasich performing well in some of these states, winning some more states. He can't go to Cleveland, even with his good poll numbers in head-to-heads with Hillary Clinton. He can't go with only one state victory. He can't only go with his home state.
He needs to accumulate a lot of delegates, and he needs to start building bridges to the party. He's still got a reputation for being kind of a lone wolf. He's gotten some endorsements. He and his prominent endorsers need to reach out to people and say, John is the one who can unify this party at a time of real need this summer in Cleveland.
Right, and
his home state.
And look, when the history of all this is written, one of the great mysteries that someone will have to unpack is how it could be that a guy with his history in the House of Representatives and his success as a governor of Ohio in terms of getting elected not once but twice and by resounding margins, how that guy has had so little institutional support in the Republican Party. he got to crack that code, because all that matters in a contested convention is the support of the organized institutional Republican Party.
And they've got to feel
fix it.
They've got to feel good about him. And it's a mystery to me why they don't feel better about that as the life raft for those who think Cruz and Trump are not electable.
Bernie Sanders taking some heat today for the interview we talked about earlier, or reference with Senor and Jr. with the editorial board of the New York Daily News, during which Sanders offered some less than fully satisfying answers to several questions on matters of substance. Let's go through those. About his plan to break up the big banks, Sanders is quoted as saying, "It's something I have not studied honestly the legal implications of." On imprisoning and interrogating captured ISIS commanders, he said, quote, "Actually, I haven't thought about it a whole lot," end quote. Regarding Israel's response to rocket attacks carried out by Hamas, quote, "I don't think I'm qualified to make decisions," end quote, deferring in that case to Israel's leaders on such matters. And less related to his presidential qualifications, but arguably more egregious, when Sanders was asked how one rides the subway here in Gotham City, he said, quote, "You get a token and you get in," end quote. And for the record, not that I have any real understanding of this, it's the case that tokens have not been used in the New York Underground since 2003. So, Mark, my question for you, and I already know the answer because you've tweeted on it, but if Hillary Clinton responded in these ways to any of these questions, let alone all of these questions, what would happen?
The New York Post headline tomorrow would have been "token candidate."
Yes.
These answers they're just not acceptable at this phase of the campaign. We've seen in past interviews we've done with him, a couple, he doesn't have depth on issues outside his wheelhouse. And the Clinton people say all the time he's a one issue candidate. He's not. He's about a 4 or 5 issue candidate. But when you get out of those 4 or 5 issues, he can't answer. And to go to an editorial board in this city with a paper like that and be unprepared and to give those answers without apparent embarrassment is an embarrassment.
And again, there are two pieces to this. I agree with everything you just said about the Clinton piece of it and about the substantive inadequacies of the answers. There are two pieces. One piece is the things that are in his wheelhouse, where he's not as strong on specifics related to Wall Street and income inequality as he should be. The other is foreign policy, where he has been in every debate clearly inferior to Hillary Clinton. And at this point, as you say, when he comes to New York City, you got to know Israel, because you're going to get asked those questions. And his answers on Israel in particular in this Ed Board meeting, are really embarrassing, not just inadequate, horrible.
I blow up Twitter when I claim correctly that Hillary Clinton is treated often to a huge double standard. Is she pressed on every issue? No. But I will say, again, if Hillary Clinton gave those answers, the campaign would come to a stop while she was in turmoil. And we're talking about it. Let's see how much attention it gets even in the day of the Wisconsin primary. All right, up next, more lessons to be learned about today's Wisconsin primary, and based on the anticipated results, how it will shape things going forward. And if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back.
As you may know by now, when you attack him, he will punch back 10 times harder. No matter who you are, a man or a woman, he treats everyone equal.
So that was in Milwaukee last night. Donald Trump bringing out his wife Melania to channel some Trumpian tough talk. Here to talk, hopefully not quite as tough with us, is Jessie Opoien, a political reporter at the Capital Times, who joins us from Madison, Wisconsin. Jessie, good to have you back. Donald Trump had been dealing all of last week while we were out there in Wisconsin. Donald Trump was dealing with his problems with female voters on the basis of various controversies he was embroiled in. He had Sarah Palin with him over the weekend, and now we saw Melania Trump with him yesterday. Has any of that done any good in terms of trying to fix some of the damage from last week?
Oh, I doubt it. Sarah Palin's appearances here in Wisconsin have gone over like a lead balloon. I think she kind of made one good Green Bay Packers joke and got a little bit of applause for that. But at the end of her speech, she kind of acknowledged this didn't really go well. She's thanked everyone for letting them crash their fish fry. It was interesting to see Melania come out. At the same time, Ted Cruz has been launching his little women's roundtable events, trying to highlight, I think, the difference between his campaign and Donald Trump's. He's talked about Donald Trump's comments about women, about things like abortion, at just about every appearance he's done since then. So no, I don't think it's going to do Donald Trump a whole lot of favors, but it's good effort.
Jessie, staying with the Republicans, where will you be watching tonight? Which cities, towns, parts of the state are you going to be watching most closely to get a beat on who's doing well?
I think it'll obviously be important to take a look at what we call the WOW counties, the suburban areas surrounding Milwaukee that are very, very bright red in contrast with Milwaukee's deep blue. We can predict that'll probably go pretty heavily for Cruz, but it's always worth watching those. I think the western part of the state's going to be really interesting for both sides, but it'll be interesting to see if Trump can pick up any support there. And in terms of Kasich in areas that he may be able to do well, the second congressional district, this area here around Madison, will be interesting to see if he can pick up those delegates or if he can't even pull that one off.
Has the race, do you think, Jessie, has the race been on the Republican side? This will be the last question about the GOP, but has the dynamics of the race at all changed in these closing hours in your sense? Is it tightening at all, or do you think Cruz is in fact pulling away?
It doesn't feel like it's tightening. I do think Ted Cruz is pulling away. He's been here a lot. I mean, he's done events in Madison, which is really unexpected for a Republican candidate, especially one who's not trying to pull off the moderate look like John Kasich is. But he seems to, by all accounts, he's got all of this establishment support. Can Trump pull out those independents and do a little bit of damage there? Sure. But I don't think it's getting any tighter as we get closer to the polls closing.
On this issue of presence in the state, as you said, Cruz and Heidi Cruz, they've been there a lot. Just watching media there and consuming media, does the fact that the Clintons were in the state early in the week, then left, then came back, are they sort of being criticized for not putting in as strong an effort as Sanders, or is their presence megawatt and therefore people feel like they put in time?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think people definitely appreciate that the president was here over the weekend, Bill Clinton, but it's been noticed that she's not around. Bernie Sanders has been having a lot of rallies. He's been hitting the pavement. Having said that, though, Bernie Sanders held a rally in Madison over the weekend in a 17,000-seat arena and only brought in 4,400 people. So there's also a little bit of rally fatigue going on, too, I think. I think it's generally accepted that the Clinton campaign is moving on and looking on to New York and not expecting to pull off a win in Wisconsin. And I think a lot of the folks who were going to vote for her probably aren't bothered by the fact that she's not here. But people have been talking about it.
And do you think, Jessie, again, the same question I was asking for the Republicans, I mean, it seemed to me, the polling on the Republican side has been pretty consistent with Cruz at a pretty large lead. On the Democratic side, it looked like there was at least a little polling that suggested the race was tightening rather than Sanders pulling away. Is that your sense right now?
Yeah, I would not be surprised whatever the outcome is tonight. I don't have a great prediction other than it's probably going to be Bernie Sanders, but it's going to be close, and I would not be shocked if maybe Hillary Clinton did pull it off. I don't think she will, but I think she could. It's a lot harder to read that race than the Republican one.
All right, Jessie Opoien, thank you. We saw you last week. It's good to have you back here again tonight. We'll be right back with our friend Dan Balz of the Washington Post with what Hillary Clinton said today on The View and a whole lot more right after this.
There are people out there who have this idea that you're not trustworthy, that they don't like you for some reason. What is that about, in your opinion?
When I started running here in New York back in '99, people said exactly the same thing. And my attitude is, if you're going to be in public life, you have to have a thick skin. So I have developed a thick skin. Yeah. And anybody who's interested, I have great creams for it.
Hillary Clinton on The View earlier today, joining us now to talk about both the race and Democratic and Republican contest. Dan Balz, chief correspondent of the Washington Post, who joins us from the spanky new Post newsroom. Dan, thank you for making time.
How
would let's say, for the sake of argument, Ted Cruz wins a convincing win tonight. leave aside the state of the Cruz campaign and the Kasich campaign. How would you appraise the state of the Stop Trump movement, these outside groups and politicos who want to stop Trump if Cruz wins big in Wisconsin?
Well, I think the Cruz campaign's view is that if he does really well, it's testimony to his success rather than the success of the Stop Trump movement. You know, the Stop Trump movement or the Never Trumps have had unexpected allies, perhaps, in Wisconsin in the radio talk show hosts who are local in Wisconsin and who have played a very large and loud role in going against Trump, you know, less so pro-Cruz. I mean, they've picked him over Trump, but they've been a factor in this. It is hard to tell. I'm not sure how much money was put into this in terms of paid advertising, but we know that paid advertising doesn't really count for that much in many of these races at this point. So I think that anything that looks like a convincing Cruz victory will give a big morale boost to those broader anti-Trump forces. And I think that's the key as we head out of Wisconsin tonight and for New York and everywhere else after that.
Dan, what within the realm of plausibility on the Democratic side could happen tonight that would surprise you?
A big Clinton victory, which I think nobody has in their calculus. A Clinton victory, I don't think is out of the question. It would be a surprise, but I don't think it's out of the question. You know, if Bernie Sanders wins, you know, essentially by the margin by which Barack Obama won in 2008, you know, a 17-point victory, I think that would be bigger than anybody anticipates and would have, you know, would have a lot of people talking a lot tomorrow about that.
You were out in Wisconsin. I know you saw candidates' behavior. It strikes me that none of the five are particularly in the top of their game right now. I don't know if you agree with that or not or want to weigh in, but do you get the sense that these are five tired people and that's affecting their performance, or is it the uncertainty of the race? What do you think? Where is the collective mind of the five remaining candidates?
Well, I think you're right in one sense that they all have to be tired. I mean, anybody who has been participating in this race in almost any way, whether it's as a candidate or a campaign staff or even journalists, you know, is very tired at this point and knows they have a long way to go after this. It's not as though, you know, Wisconsin's going to be the end of it. So to some extent, I think they're pacing. Yep. I think in other ways they are trying to think about how you play each event. Hillary Clinton has tried to downplay expectations in Wisconsin by not being there very often. And I think that affects the way she performs even when she's there. Bernie Sanders, you know, he's going from event to event. He's had a very active schedule, but it has to be wearing on him. And on the Republican side, we put aside the problems that Donald Trump has had. That would knock anybody off their game or make them look like they're less effective right now or less at the top of their game. But you know, Kasich has played Wisconsin half-heartedly is probably not quite fair, but he's not played it very energetically. Cruz is the only one who has. I'm not sure Cruz is off his game. I mean, I think that Cruz is a pretty consistent performer, and I think he has been, for the most part, that in Wisconsin. Although the one event I saw last week with him, which was a kind of sit-down roundtable with his wife and his mother and Carly Fiorina, it seemed to me a relatively flat event.
Yeah. Dan, I know you suggested that that we're all tired, and I'm looking at you, and you seem pretty bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So I'm going to ask you at least one more question here. You know, looking beyond Wisconsin, we're going to have, if Sanders does win by whatever margin, we're going to have a hotly contested Democratic primary in New York. Almost no one, none of our viewers remember the last time there was a hotly contested Democratic primary in New York. 1992 was the last time. What can we expect? What will that look like here for 2 weeks, Sanders and Clinton going at it hammer and tongs?
Well, there's nothing like the New York press corps for a contested Democratic primary and probably for the Republican primary. It will be the highest volume campaign we've probably seen all year. Yep. But the difference between now and 92 or 1988, the other contested primary in New York, Democratic side, is that it's being done in the age of social media and Twitter and around-the-clock cable. So I just think that it's going to be such saturation level and at such high volume. I'm not sure people will be able to sustain themselves for 2 solid weeks at it. I mean, because we know what it's been like in Wisconsin for the last week or 10 days, and it's going to be that times, you pick the number, 2, 3, 4, 5 in New York, just because of the nature of the way New York operates.
Dan, thanks. We got to go. Come up. We'll buy you an egg cream and a Knish. We appreciate it, and we'll be right back. Check out BloombergPolitics.com for all of tonight's Wisconsin primary coverage coming up on Bloomberg TV. Emily Chang talks to the CEO of Home Advisor. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. All Wisconsin. Sayonara.